Hey everybody, Joe here from the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. If you enjoy what we do here on the show and you think it's worth your hard-earned money, you can support the show via Patreon. Just a $1 donation gets you access to bonus episodes, our Discord, and regular episodes before everybody else. If you donate at an elevated level, you get even more bonus content. A digital copy of my book, The Hooligans of Kandahar, and a sticker from our Teespring store. Our show will always be ad-free and is totally supporter-driven. We use that money to pay our bills, buy research materials that make this show possible, and support charities like the Kurdish Red Crescent, the Flint Water Fund, and the Halo Trust. Consider joining the Legion of the Old Crow today. And now back to the show.
We'll see about that. I ain't afraid to stand up to friends. Just ask Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
That guy's Spartacus.
Hello, and welcome to part 2 of that Spartacus podcast of this Lions Led by Donkeys series. I ruined that. It's Lions Led by Donkeys. We're talking about Spartacus part 2 today. What's up, Nick?
How's it going?
It's been all right. Last week we talked about Spartacus and the Third Servile War, and people had comments. One of them was actually really interesting, and one that you particularly will probably care about.
Really?
Guy is a Roman reenactor / cosplayer
That's
here.
the thing.
So those are his words. So I'm assuming he's been listening to the show for a while. He told me, because we made fun of them saying Jupiter's cock on the show Spartacus on Starz.
Absolutely.
Turns out,
Amazing.
normal saying. It was by Jupiter's cock was a real thing in Roman times. It was just a standard way of swearing. Two common ones we use during Roman cosplay is per mentulum Martis, or by Mars's cock, and per colium lovis, by Jupiter's balls.
A lot of cock region talk going on.
It's not that much different. I mean, like, soldiers are time immortal, right? Like,
oh yeah, for sure.
It's like that.
It's pretty funny.
They found on a Roman garrison, soldiers had carved like dicks in the walls. Like, yep, that tracks.
Fucking dinglings.
That tracks. And you asked what other sports Romans were into other than watching people get fucking mauled to death in the Colosseum.
Yeah,
chariot racing. Chariot racing.
I thought you said cherry racing. That would have been interesting, cherry racing.
Just throw them out in the dirt. It's like that scene from The Simpsons where fucking Ralph throws a banana on the ground. Go banana! Yeah, chariot racing was a big deal in Rome. I didn't bring it up because I wasn't doing a history of like Roman sports, but like it was a huge deal, and it'd actually become even bigger during the time of the Byzantine Empire. Like, political parties were aligned to different chariot teams. Like, massive amounts of political violence were committed over chariot racing. Yeah, which I wish I could say is dumber than the system we have now, but it's not.
I was kind of hoping it would be like a NASCAR thing.
I mean,
The Hicks of the Romans.
It is way more popular than NASCAR. 100% more popular, because like nobody really gives a shit about NASCAR in the United States. Like, it has like its hardcore fans.
I mean, well, the tailgates are pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's like that, but like it was way more important in Rome.
But I'm pretty sure that's the only thing people really go for, really. The tailgates.
the for NASCAR or chariot racing?
Ooh, both. How are those fucking tailgate parties?
I imagine they were miserable because everybody smelled bad and like there was sewage in the streets and stuff.
It's really hard to get rid of dick cheese at the time.
Yeah, do a keg stand, your toga runs up over your fucking head, your balls will just flop out. So when we left you last week, Spartacus, Crixus, and what had quickly grown to be thousands of escaped Roman slaves had rampaged through the Roman countryside, burning and looting their way through the Republic's rich and powerful summer homes. Good. But they killed a lot of people. But like, I'm not going to shed tears for the Roman slave drivers. You do not, in fact, have to hand it to Roman slave owners. The rebels had grown fat and happy, pillaging their way through the area, and their numbers continued to swell. Like we talked about at length during the first episode, even the best case scenario for slaves working in rich people's villas was not great. So watching a bunch of dudes show up, break their chains, and give them a chance at freedom meant that the vast majority of slaves came across them, ended up joining them. It doesn't really say what happens to the slaves if they don't want to join them. I'm going to assume that not good things happens to them.
Right.
Because I mean they're killing most of the people that live in these homes unless they escape. So like if you're like a slave who doesn't want to join Spartacus and the boys, you probably get the stabby
Spartacus
stabby.
and the boys.
Yeah. Panic at the Rebellion, which I think was a band name that somebody said. I like it. After running around and doing hood rat shit for around a year, someone in the slave army, nobody's entirely sure who, I think I've pointed out before, slaves in the middle of a bloody revolt rarely stopped what they were doing in time to jot down a manifesto of any kind. And also Spartacus, probably illiterate, so probably wasn't going to do a lot of writing. He decided that if they kept fucking around in the open, it was only a matter of time before they ran across an actual Roman army. So it was in their best interest to find a place that they might be able to defend instead of just like fucking up at towns and stuff, which to be fair, they had done a lot. They've raided quite a few towns and villages.
And it's popped up on fucking big Roman radar.
Yeah, like you're ruining their fucking property values. And like it's like now the only way you get any people's attention and power is if you burn things, because that like lowers the shareholders' value. I don't think I can legally say I agree or disagree with that, but let's just say that these two things track because it got the Romans to pay attention. I should clarify a few things about the slave army, however. Individually, most of them were pretty dependable fighters. The core of the army, several hundred of them, were trained gladiators and who, remember, were mostly former soldiers or fighters in some way in some time. However, they'd picked up a lot of villa and field slaves, which were definitely not. Furthermore, gladiators were trained in one-on-one combat, not war. Remember, we talked about gladiatorial combat in the last episode. It was for entertainment. It wasn't practical.
Can you imagine them really in combat and be like, hey, you missed your line, and then they just get stabbed?
It's like attempting to fucking bring capoeira into MMA. It looks pretty kind of dumb.
Do you remember the movie that came?
For example, there's a capoeira movie. I think they just call that Footloose.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, but
because all the dancing.
There's a movie, and there's an army dude in it. But he retired as soon as he left the islands. And then he brought capoeira to the inner city.
What is this like? Fucking Gangster's Paradise, but capoeira?
I enjoyed the movie.
So like he was in the American army, because like who the fuck taught him capoeira in the American army? That's like, I think he did it for funsies while he was PCS'd. I don't know. I don't like it. There's so many holes in the story. Stolen capoeira valor, and you know that's one of the nice martial arts that if you made it up, you'd hardly be able to tell. So, for example, we're going to talk about the Roman army a little bit. The Roman army at the time, especially post-Marian reforms, was something of a weapon of mass destruction of its day. This is because its maniple legions were able to work together as a unit to steamroll their enemy. I'm not really going to go into huge detail how the Roman legion works or how it functioned in battle. I think I've pointed this out before, maybe in our Teutoburg Forest episode, that the HBO series Rome did a very good job of showing a legion at war and fighting. How oh, God is perfect. I haven't seen anything better. Like if you read some of the stuff from like the Marian reforms and say like Crassus Lives and stuff like that, it shows exactly how it's supposed to work in the best case scenario, where you know every line of the legion will fight, or of a maniple will fight for only a few minutes before being rotated out, so they don't get tired. And like the front rank is the least experienced, and then so on and so forth until you get to the most experienced people in the back. Because by the time you rotate forward, the most experienced people will now be at the front, and the enemy will be tired.
Right.
So they can completely
fucking
dominate.
Line changes. All right.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But it required very good discipline and teamwork. It wasn't like individual Roman soldiers were very good soldiers or something. It was actually kind of the opposite of that. A good example of what happens when a legion is unable to fight together as it's trained is Hannibal Barca storming across the Alps and fighting them in irregular war and like ambushing them and forcing them into situations where they couldn't deploy their formations correctly. They got fucking massacred. But like that could be said for virtually any army throughout time. You take them out of their comfort zone, they can't fight. Looking at you, Iraq and Afghanistan, or Vietnam, or like any or Afghanistan again for the Soviet Union. Like militaries are trained a very specific way, and if soldiers can't deploy correctly and fight the way they're trained, they kind of just turn into panic meat bags that try to save their own lives and not fight, which is how an army loses. But the gladiators were the opposite. They were individually probably better fighters than Roman soldiers, and they almost certainly had more experience. But they made a pretty terrible army. Not all of these guys, like, because remember one of the theories about Spartacus is he's a captured Roman soldier. Not all of them were. So, like, they weren't trained how to fight together. They didn't train as gladiators how to fight together because they would be fighting one another. So Spartacus, or whoever it was, coming up with the idea to pull back into a defensible position was the only good idea that they had
like,
so
is there
far.
like a rank structure that they go off of?
Definitely not. No.
This guy, I don't know. His dick cheese is like smellier.
He's got the more powerful funk. That means
clearly
he's in charge.
He has wisdom.
Definitely not. Like everybody seems to just default to the fact that Spartacus was in charge. There's actually no evidence of that. It seems like they rotated through people that may or may not have good ideas at the time, and a small cadre of people, Crixus, Spartacus, and Onialis, who end up getting killed eventually, would kind of come up with ideas too. There's no rank structure. There's no unit structure. It's not even like a unified force. At various times, like chunks of this army are like peeling off to raid shit on their own. Nobody's in charge. Because, they're a bunch of rebels and some of them aren't soldiers whatsoever. And every group, like it's a super multinational group, multi-ethnic group. Some of them don't speak the same language. So there's like a very good chance that like if Spartacus came up with a plan, someone down the line had no fucking idea what he was saying. Which like is very common for armies like this. Like I think we've talked about this before in different battle. But like, there's no cohesion. The only cohesion is fuck the Romans and fuck bitches get money pretty much. Like they want to loot as many things as possible, which they're accumulating a massive amount of wealth, and dishing out an incredible amount of revenge for the people that enslaved them. But as far as like an overarching goal, no, there's no evidence that one ever existed. But we'll talk about that in a little bit because I do have to try to explain how I picked some sources and how I told the story. So the defensive position they decided to pick was Mount Vesuvius. So they climbed up Mount Vesuvius and camped. Now, obviously, when most people, and probably you, think when I bring up Mount Vesuvius is like as the Mount Doom that laid waste to Pompeii. And that isn't wrong. It's the same mountain, but this is taking place about a century before that.
I was
would
also
occur.
thinking of, for some reason, Anchorman 2.
I
don't know why either.
One day, like we've known each other for nearly a decade, and we've been working on this podcast for almost 3 years, and I still have no idea how your mind works. Sometimes.
It's a fucking roller coaster.
So like back then, the century before, it was the nuclear bomb of its day. Mount Vesuvius is pretty lush and green, and it was actually covered in like really thick, annoying vines that like people know they had to chop through in order to like make their way, like create a footpath. But there's also only one crossable trail leading up to the mountain, which created one hell of a choke point and made it very easy to defend. So these are all good choices made by these people who honestly had no idea what they were doing. And while they camped there, the slow gears of Roman statecraft and bureaucracy began to turn. The Roman government saw Spartacus's actions as little more than an armed crime wave.
Nice.
Still. However, because it is tearing up the good neighborhood where the senators and their friends owned property, they decided it'd be a good idea to do something about it. However, this led to a bit of a problem. commanding an army to go crush some slaves was hardly an attractive job for anybody that would want to volunteer for it. Roman generals were all politicians, members of the Senate and men of influence. These were not lowly soldiers who had worked their way up and like pulled themselves by their military bootstraps. No,
boot sandals?
Wearing sandals. Now sandal straps. Like they commanded armies specifically to win glory and further their political careers or win riches in foreign lands that they could then feasibly turn around and further their political careers with. So it's a lot like today, but instead of becoming congressman, you end up working for General Dynamics. Like it's clout sharking. And you're not going to like, I'll volunteer to command the armies against Spartacus because there's nothing to gain for it. If I went and crushed Spartacus's bitch ass, I don't win any honor. Nobody's going to throw me a triumph because I just... I can't write a fucking memoir about this. Nobody's going to care. I can't get to the next, like, because I talked about the last episode, like, there's a very set, like, script of climbing the ladder of Roman politics. One of those is military glory. A very important one was military glory. So, like, this doesn't edge me up further up this ladder. I'm not going to fucking do it. So, absolutely nobody wanted to do it. So the job fell on one Gaius Claudius Glauber.
With that name, that's just got to happen.
Yeah, you got to get to the glob. It might be Glaber. I didn't fucking take Latin. Glauber. And honestly, I don't care. I'm going with Glauber. Now, Glauber is one of 8 elected praetors within Rome at the time. Praetors were elected members of the Roman judiciary, and at various times within the Roman Republican history, they could end up controlling the entire government if one of the elected councils, of which there was normally 2, would leave Rome for some reason.
Chris Hansen caught him.
He gets with a name like Glauber. Well, he's like, go ahead and have a seat, Claudius.
If I didn't know what praetor meant, you're here today? That's what I'm getting at.
Oh, God. Roman Pizzagate. It's actually where it began. I mean, that's where pizza was invented. Probably not. I don't
Pizza's
know.
good.
Oh, God. Nixon on it. My eye is opened. Now, of the various praetors within Rome, Glauber was considered a junior and much less influential. Some of this could have had to do with the fact that he was a common plebe by birth and had worked his way up through military action, not connections. So, like, he wasn't born in any of the rich patrician or any powerful family. And the last military rank that he held was legate or legatus. I'm probably pronouncing all of these wrong. It can be considered like a decently ranking general. He would be, I don't know, a brigadier general or something. However, he had been promoted to that job and then immediately taken office as a praetor, meaning he'd never actually commanded an army.
Don't need to. Turns out.
Don't need. I mean, honestly, in Rome, sometimes you're totally right about that. But because the dumb processes of Roman government, suddenly it was now his job to march an army into Mount Vesuvius and defeat Spartacus and preserve one of the most powerful homeowners associations of all time. But like I pointed out in the last episode, Rome was still short on well-trained legionnaires or soldiers. I'll use that term, I exchange that term back and forth, and it probably pisses some people off. Sorry. So because there's so many wars and other rebellions popping off all over the place, they had nobody left to spare. So Glauber would have to again scrape an army together out of whatever he could find lying around, and what he found was not great. According to Appian in Civil Wars, Glauber's army of around 3,000 men was, quote, picked in haste and at random, for the Romans did not consider this war yet, but a raid, something of an attack of robbery. So, Rome's really phoning this one in. Let's get the Legionnaire C team up here. Like, what is lower on the totem pole than I don't know, the reserves? Like, this is below National Guard,
State
below
Guard?
reserves. They're calling up calling up State Guard, like the unarmed positions. Like, give him a spear. Fuck it. Keeping up that idea, Glauber didn't have any grand plans. He may have wanted to confront the slaves in open battle. Should he have like a legion at his back? But he didn't. he had the Roman version of like the state guard. So he tossed out the idea of like fate squaring off like a mano-a-mano in open battle and settled on another idea. Glaber knew, like most people, that there's only one way up the mountain, and no matter how defensible the entire thing was, it didn't matter if he didn't intend on actually fighting. He would simply camp out on that single path and lay siege and starve out the rebels.
I mean, solid.
So that's a plan. Yeah, it's a long plan, but I mean, it's a plan. It's better than like let's like an action movie attacking up the hill one at a time or whatever. So that's exactly what they did. They marched this newly formed militia directly out into the mountain and plopped them down in for a siege, daring the slaves to try to break it. Which, to their credit, they had no idea how. Like they've never been besieged before. Whatever plan they were going to do was going to be very weird. Now, the vast majority of the slaves knew they had no chance of, like, running down the mountain path and squaring up against a Roman line, even a shitty hand-picked militia version of it. They weren't trained for Roman war. They had no idea of how to, like, plop a Manipal legion or a phalanx down. So they decided they would fight. They just wouldn't fight a Roman war, which, good idea. Spartacus and crew wouldn't be marching down the path, but the rest of the mountain behind them was nothing but sheer cliff faces. So, like, there's no plan B here. So the slaves reached deep into their brain palace and found probably the coolest plan B I've ever found in my life. I'm gonna ask you, what would you do in this situation if you're Spartacus? Like, what would your plan be? Do you, like, run down the cliff? Do you try to wait out the siege? Like, what do you do?
With the wealth that I gathered ahead of time, I'd buy Roman uniforms and go down and be like, yeah, they're still up there. And one at a time and just bring my whole crew down.
Just from, like, ye old Amazon? So, I have to admit, I'm looking at this plan, and I don't know what the fuck I would do. And I certainly would not have thought about what the slaves end up doing. So they take up their weapons and begin hacking away at the copious amount of vines that grow all over the mountains. Then they weave them together into improvised ropes. They then cast the ropes over the sheer cliff faces and fucking rappel
fucking
down.
Aerosolting.
That's right, baby.
That's fucking awesome.
Meanwhile, Glaber and his forces had no idea that they were apparently fighting the only air assault qualified slaves in all of Rome. Now, in the show, I didn't watch it all the way through.
It's like their parents are downstairs and they're sneaking out the back window.
Yeah, with like the fucking the sheets tied together or whatever. Now, I looked up how they covered this in this show, because it's a show that exists and I have no plans of watching all the seasons of it. But they have Spartacus and a couple people roped down to do this. I need to be very clear here. The entire army rappelled down the cliff face. This is not like a dozen people. This is
Could
thousands
you imagine
of
how many people fell?
It had to be a couple. Yeah, like, lost another one. Yeah. OSHA regulations in the slave army were very lax. I don't think they had one. I mean, I think I'm using the term rappelled incorrectly. I believe they just like free climbed down.
You think they had some climber bros? You need to chalk up before we go down.
Yeah, the wearing short shorts and weird grippy shoes all of a sudden.
I do this thing in my van. I live in my van, just so everybody knows.
So I could really become one with the Rock. I swear to God, somebody give me my gladius so I could stab this bitch in the face.
Any climbers that follow us, I don't know. Do we have any?
I don't know. Someone's got to. Someone's probably really into bouldering, which, as a man that is 6'3" and 240 pounds as a sport, I cannot do.
The fuck is bouldering?
It's like really... I have a hard time explaining it. Watch a YouTube video. It's really weird. Like, they climb just like, it's not like cliffs, it's straight up boulders, and they do like free climbing around these giant boulders where like there might be only a couple feet off the ground, but they're like Spider-Manning that shit. Like completely.
My fingers are already cramping.
Yeah, exactly. I do not have the grip strength for it. Now, Glaber had no idea that any of this is going on because, of course, he didn't. He was so sure of himself and the incompetence of the slaves that he didn't bother in setting up any kind of watch posts or pickets watching his flank. This is what is generally known as a bad idea. Because even if you're putting anybody under siege, you put up guards. But apparently not. So it must have been a pretty big surprise for everybody in Glauber's army's camp when the repelling slave army rounded them out and attacked them from behind. The massacre of the Roman militia at the foot of the mountain was so complete, it isn't even noted how if anybody managed to escape it. To include Glauber himself, he simply falls off from all of written Roman history and isn't even noted if he died. Have you ever been so fucking killed during a battle you get ethered from all of history? It's like some Stalin disappearing photograph shit. Either he was killed or so completely dishonored by being beaten by vine-raiding gladiator that Roman history never thought to make a note of him ever again. Which is such a thorough historical own. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it before.
Yes, you got the old razzle-dazzle.
I have to assume he died. And then the Romans like, oh, lost a praetor, elect a new one. Obviously, this was a huge victory for Spartacus and his army, but they knew that their vine trick would not work twice. So they looted what they could from the thousands of dead Romans.
They could have.
Quick, hide all the bodies. They couldn't possibly figure out how we did this. Or maybe, more importantly, they run up against a general who knew to put fucking guards out. Like, keep someone awake at night, do something. I don't know. Use scouts, maybe? What's important here is, when you watch a lot of stuff or read a lot of stuff, it's like, oh, the gladiators are using their sick gladiatorial skills and weapons. At this point, all that shit's gone. They've cast off all their gladiator stuff and have thousands of sets of Roman equipment and armor at this point because they've killed so many people.
Now they could go through
they're
with
not
my
wearing.
plan.
It's a little late for that, but yes.
Well, if anything does happen.
Guys, I have an idea. Let's just march like a Roman legion and just walk into Rome.
Boom.
By now, word of the slave army that had routed a Roman praetor spread far and wide. Thousands of slaves began to escape their bondage and join, as did thousands more free people, which is really weird. Remember, some of these slaves that were running away actually had better living conditions than free and unemployed Romans because the landowning class had fucked them both in different ways. So they saw no problem joining forces to do some fucking right back and make them pay. A lot of them are like, I don't see anything wrong with slavery. But also, fuck those guys. And because the unemployment rate in Rome is incredibly high because of all the slaves. By this point, Spartacus's forces had grown to the tens of thousands, and they had looted more than enough weapons to go around. Shepherds and herdsmen joined his army, and they began to be fielded as scouts, which means he's now smarter than a praetor. And the slaves began to develop something like a spontaneous army, but there's still no real discipline or command structure here. Now, you would think Rome would begin to panic at this point, like they routed and killed a praetor, but they didn't. Obviously, they were probably still a bit embarrassed about that army losing and one of their 8 praetors being killed, probably by a bunch of slaves. But even if they had lost the entire force of 3,000, which they probably did, at least mostly, and I should point out that Spartacus is not taking prisoners. He's killing everyone. I would imagine. Which, I get it, yeah. But I should point out that losing a force of 3,000, not that big of a loss. They were militia, not a legion. So Romans seemed to just shrug off their shoulders and find another praetor for this job. This time it was Publius Varinius.
Do you think he was excited to take this job?
Probably not. He's like, wait, what happened to the last guy?
Yeah, he doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. You get promoted because somebody died and there's no one else to do the job. Gotta love it. And then I should rephrase that. This is definitely not a promotion. Varinius is another man that not much is known about, though he seemed to be of higher standing than Glauber, because at one point he was a proconsul, or someone who's
not higher than Glauber.
Glauber bottom of the barrel here when it comes to Roman bureaucrats. Now, a proconsul is someone that can act on behalf of one of the 2 Roman consuls, and he would eventually go on to become a governor after this. Though for some reason, the Star series randomly changes the name to Publius Maximus.
You gotta add the Maximus.
Because it's cooler. I mean, Maximus, legitimately a much cooler name. Despite every primary source clearly naming him correctly as Varinius. It also frames Glauber and Varinius as foes and constantly fucking with each other and stabbing each other in the back. Glauber got enough of the stabby stab on his own. There's no reason for this. There's no evidence for it either, because they're not fucking each other over for military glory. Because I need to be clear here, they didn't think there's any military glory in here, any more than any other two politicians in Rome who are always fucking each other over. But despite all of these things, a decent military commander, Verinius was not. There was no way to tell, but it seems that he wasn't even as good as a commander as Glauber, and he didn't have nearly as much experience. There's no evidence of him like rising to any kind of rank within the Roman military, which is a problem. At least not so much as anybody thought it important enough to write down. Much like Glauber, Verinius' army would be made up of militia because they are apparently not quick learners. This force was much larger than Glauber's and was at least equal to that of Spartacus' still growing force, so like tens of thousands of people. Unlike Glauber, Verinius split his command with two other sub-commanders, Ferruus and Cassinius. This is most likely because it's a much bigger force, span of control and all that. And so that makes sense. But what happens next does not. Instead of organizing and dispersing his force in a way to force Spartacus to confront him in open battle, which he probably would have won, and by him I mean Verinius, he allowed his force to be split up under his sub-commanders and taken into different directions. Not a good idea. Again, nobody is sure why this happened. No notes are made of this. It just says like they split up. Nobody's really sure why.
Bad breakups.
It seems like Verinius was just bad at his job, and he thought that each one of his forces was good enough to beat Spartacus, and if they dispersed, they have a better chance of tracking him down. Spoiler alert, does not happen. What's more likely is Verinius was bad at being a commander, and they underestimated the threat that Spartacus posed still. So both Cassinius and Ferruus' forces were picked apart one by one. Spartacus knew that he didn't want to confront these groups all at once, so he simply ambushed them one at a time.
That fucking sucks.
Because Spartacus probably wasn't a military commander in Rome, like some people like to believe he was. But he wasn't an idiot. He knew that their best way to win was clearly to not engage them toe to toe. So what would happen is, like, say Cassinius' forces is marching from point A to point B. Spartacus's forces would hit and run them all the way there, and then kill what was left at the when they finally got to where they were going. And then once that was done, Spartacus's forces crept so close to the force led by Verinius that when they finally did ambush him, Verinius was bathing in a river and had to run for his life butt-ass naked with gladiators on his heels. He only barely escaped capture while his force behind him was slaughtered. His personal horse was captured and ridden away in victory by Spartacus himself.
Is that true?
It is, according to Appian. Probably.
Okay.
Once again, the gladiators looted the thousands of corpses left behind in the aftermath of the battle. Their numbers, again, grew even more as more and more slaves ditched their shitty lives, as well as the aura of, holy shit, these guys are actually doing it. The word began to spread. And soon Spartacus's army, which remember began with between 10 and 30 people, or maybe 70, was now around 80,000.
What's the time period?
About a year and a half,
Christ.
2 years at this point. Yeah.
If only our podcast can take off like that.
I mean, it kind of has.
Yeah.
And we had to kill significantly less Italians in order to grow. Maybe that's the secret. Edit that out. Now, the gladiators or people with them, because remember, this started as a core of gladiators, right? Or at least gladiator-adjacent people in training to be gladiators, people who at least looked like they were soldiers or had some soldiering skill. Those people were now vastly outnumbered by every other kind of slave that Rome had to offer, and also some random normal people that weren't slaves. So they kind of had a problem. We have an 80,000 man army, but 90% of these motherfuckers don't know how to fight. But thankfully, there was thousands of proven soldiers within the ranks that had become gladiators or various other things. So as the season rolled into winter, And some groups went out and raided Roman countrysides. Like, because remember, I've probably already said this a dozen times already, but this is not a unified force. Like, at no point is Spartacus holding a formation and taking accountability of how many fucking people he has. Like, there's a core of people that 100% are behind whatever they're doing, but then there's also like groups of people like, I'm gonna go fuck up that town, and then they'd all just go. Yeah, like there's no command and control here. But for a lot of people, they stayed like during the winter, they drilled. Like they kind of made their own impromptu ludus and like trained them in that like kind of how they knew to be soldiers, but also how to fight like a gladiator. So like some people got some training. Not everybody, but everybody had certainly more training than where they started out. And this is where I have to kind of explain how I charted the rest of this story. I have to point out a few things before we get moving on from here on out. The history of the rest of Spartacus's war is fucking all over the place. In fact, two of the primary sources I've been using for this series, Appian Civil War and Plutarch, tell completely different stories, though they don't technically contradict one another, but they also have nothing in common. For instance, battles happen in one that simply don't happen in the other. Plutarch makes no attempt to explain anything that Spartacus does, and instead just charts his manic movements across Italy without seemingly understanding any of it. That's not a knock against Plutarch at all. It's just he didn't feel like expanding on any of it, which I get, which, like I said, is completely fine. I can tell you from experience that it is normal to not understand why some historical figures do what they do and what their rationale is. Sometimes people are just unstable, make wild and dumb choices, and you can't always put yourself in their shoes. That's not your job as a historian, actually, is to try to like explain why people do things, unless there's more evidence, which there's not. But on this show, we like to tell a story, as well as maybe educate people about things they didn't previously know about. So rather than just shrugging off and saying, I don't know what happened, I don't, but I will use Appian Civil War as the main source going forward. Technically, this is correct, as I'm still using a primary source, which, as Futurama has always told me, is the best kind of correct. Now, if you are someone who fancies yourself a Roman history nut and you prefer Plutarch's side of things, that does not mean that either one of us is incorrect. They're both reputable primary sources on everything that we're talking about. All those
big Plutarch fans out there. Let's pump the brakes a little bit.
Big Plutarch stands. Yeah, Plu stands. Neither contra. It's like I don't know. It's if you read a book and watched a movie based on that book and things are different, like they're not necessarily wrong. It's a different story. That may not be the best analogy here. I'm going to move on. I'm not good with analogies. Okay, another side note here. Sorry. It's become something of a popular nugget of wisdom about these events that Crixus and Spartacus had a falling out, leading to them to split their armies up. This is in the Spartacus movie. This is in Spartacus on Stars, where they had like, Crixus is like, I'm taking the Gauls and I'm fucking off on my own. There's no evidence this ever happened. In fact, it seems to be something that the movies just kind of made up. Or people looked at a battle that we're about to explain and said, well, Crixus's army got wiped out and Spartacus's didn't, so therefore they couldn't possibly have been working together. I feel like we're probably applying too much military thought on people who were not commanding real militaries. Or maybe putting too much personality into something that we don't actually have evidence of it happening. Because I highly doubt, in my opinion, that they would make it this far and then start fighting one another. They probably would have done it way long time ago before they were in command of 10,000 or tens of thousands of people. Because at this point, their lives literally depended on one another. It seems like if I'm going to use Occam's razor here, this did not happen. So the rebels broke camp in the winter, and the Romans were finally getting their shit together. They finally realized that this was not a crime wave. They had another fucking war on their hands. So they dispatched 2 consular legions under the command of Lucius Gelenius and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Cordanius. Fuck these names. I should point out, that is only 2 people.
Concierge legion?
Consular legion. These two men were the consuls of Rome, meaning these were their personal legions under the commands of the consuls. This meant that they held the highest elected position in all of the Republic. So, like, Rome is no longer fucking around. And then soon these two men and their legions were dispatched. Spartacus and Crixus knew they wanted absolutely nothing to fucking do with this coming battle. They heard through the grapevine, through slaves and their scouts, like, bro, the legions are coming. These aren't these scrubs that we've been fighting. And Crixus and Spartacus probably look at each other like, fuck this, we need to get the fuck out of here. So they attempted to outmaneuver them. Unfortunately, this was never going to happen. An actual Roman legion was something of a machine, not just in killing people like I already talked about, but in movement. The most basic Roman soldier could march 20 to 22 miles a day.
Oh, with the shitty sandals?
With shitty sandals and full pack and food on their backs. Like, these guys, like, most of their training was marching. Like, I could never match that. And I am going to assume that I'm much healthier than any Roman soldier who's ever existed. The longest ruck march I ever did was around 20 miles, give or take. I carried probably similar weight to a Roman soldier, maybe a little less. And I was fucking done for days afterwards. I wanted
your
to
issue
die.
was you weren't wearing sandals.
And I had modern footwear. Yeah, I had modern footwear. And, like, you know, a modern rucksack with back support. These guys are carrying shit in a sack and wearing metal and sandals. In the Italian sun. Like, it's incredible what they could pull off. But the reason why I point that out is a slave army.
From the normal sun?
It's really fucking hot in Italy in the summer.
Shaped like the Italian hand.
I'm fucking shining here. Now, the reason why I point that out is a slave army made up of mostly half-trained farm slaves and a couple of gladiators was never going to be able to outrun this. Even in their wildest dreams, like, maybe some of the best people could have, like, gotten away. It's like that saying, like, I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun you. If they would have marched as hard as they possibly could, parts of it maybe would have been able to escape. But according to Appian, the slaves are maneuvering around Mount Garganus when they split up in order to easily travel in, marching with huge groups of tens of thousands of people on small mountain roads is kind of hard. So they split up, like taking two different paths around a mountain with the idea of meeting up on the other side and continuing to press north out of Italy. Maybe. That's what most people subscribe to, is that they were attempting to march north out of Italy and back into Gaul. Gallienus' forces found the split forces being led by Crixus, and there was no way Crixus could run. So for the first time, the slaves came up against a real Roman legion, and Crixus was fucking annihilated. His force of nearly 30,000 was wiped out, and with the prisoners all being killed on the spot. It isn't known how Crixus died, but we know he did not escape the battlefield alive. The reason why they were split is because they simply couldn't meet up. And remember, this is the Roman times. You're not going to, like, fucking get on the radio and be like, bro, I got ambushed. Like, you fucked. There's no way Spartacus knew. Like, Spartacus didn't even know this happened. He didn't know until he emerged on the other side of the mountain, and there was now a fucking legion behind him and not Crixus. Fuck. And he had no choice but to march as hard and fast as he possibly could north. With the death of Crixus, tens of thousands of his followers, and tens of thousands of his followers, he probably knew the game was up, and he had to get the fuck out of Italy. And that's when, like, most people, like I said, most people think that he was aiming for Gaul, to the north of Rome, and, like, his force could dissipate, go back. Most of them are Gaulish. He may be Thracian, that everybody could run back home. And a lot of people say, like, oh, he was planning on marching on Rome itself, but he marched right the fuck past Rome. So that probably wasn't it. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, because there is the idea that it happened again. So what he did then is he immediately found out there was another legion right in front of him under the command of the other consul. He knew he was going to... Yeah, if you caught that, I did not want to say that name a second time.
I mean, at least you got that one guy... Gillette,
the best the legion can get. He knew he was going to have no choice but to fight this legion. Like, there's no way around him. He knew that he had a disadvantage. He knew that he had every disadvantage known to man, and he had to do something that the Romans could not prepare for. Like, I can't join my shields together and march at these guys. They'll fucking annihilate me. I can't do the vine trick again. What can I do? So he simply spun his force around and attacked the legion that was coming at him from behind, because they probably weren't prepared for them to turn around and attack him. So his forces turned and attacked Gallienus. His forces were caught by surprise and they couldn't get in formation correctly, so they kind of all retreated in confusion.
Huh.
But Spartacus wasn't done. He turned his force around again and launched his attack against the other consul, routing them as well after a short battle. After the second battle, Spartacus captured hundreds of Roman soldiers, and apparently they willingly surrendered themselves to him, probably assuming, hey, if anybody knows what happens after you surrender in a battle, it would be slaves. They're going to enslave us.
Not this time.
But Spartacus was kind of right in that. He decided he would do the same thing to the Roman soldiers that happened to him. And that is, he turned them into gladiators and made them fight to the death for their entertainment. And what we can assume is the Uno reverse card of gladiatorial funeral games for Crixus. He forced 300 Roman soldiers to fight to the death, and then the last one standing, he'd kill himself.
I mean, that's not much of a prize.
Some people refused to take part, and they were also executed. I assume the guy who won probably thought he was going to go free. They're Spartacus is congratulations, you win. This sword
sleep, bitch.
in your chest. So these surprise attacks so badly rattled the Romans, they couldn't bring their forces together to bring their collective strength against Spartacus. And Spartacus used that time to run north. The consuls were recalled to Rome, where they're both stripped of their title and power by the Senate. Now, Spartacus originally, at least according to Appian, wanted to march on Rome, but then immediately rethought the plan when his blood rage about his friends dying subsided. Consider it the post-nut clarity of war. Because he's when you think about it, yeah, I just defeated 2 consular legion, which is fucking crazy. Should have never happened. But marching on Rome with 80,000 people, well, actually half that now, not going to work. Especially because he's fighting with an army that does not know how to lay siege to anything. These are all pretty big gaps in their plan. But to Spartacus's credit, he's hold up, this is a fucking bad idea. So now the war has been going on for 3 years, and he reverted back to his old plan, which was get the fuck out of Italy, which I assume is most people's plan when they find themselves in Italy. I thought it was
he was going to vine out of there.
Swinging a vine all the way to fucking mainland Europe. I don't mean that, Italy. I love you. I've never been there before. Now, in Rome, it came time for new elections to the office of praetor. By now, nobody in Rome doubted the threat of Spartacus, and he was no longer being underestimated. You could actually probably say he's being overestimated at this point. However, whoever was elected praetor would almost certainly be sent out to fight him, and nobody wanted to be the next guy to get dunked on by the local slave rebellion and ruin their political career or get killed. Because, if you led an army against Spartacus and lost, you're done. You're not going to be able to climb up the political ladder anymore. You're probably going to lose your fortune.
Did they do a nose goes?
So nobody came forward. Kind of. Not really. So nobody came forward to stand for election, with the exception of one guy, Marcus Licinius Crassus. Now, if people who are the old heads of Roman history probably recognize that fucking name. Crassus had been formed to incredible wealth and power, only to be forced to flee from Rome to Spain after Consul Cinna attempted to order everyone who had sided with Licinius Cornelius Sulla during his march on Rome. Now, once Crassus showed himself to be the ruthless bastard that he was, it kind of charted the rest of his path through his life and what would eventually become the Roman Empire. He recruited a legion with his own money and then threatened local cities and villages in Spain with pillaging if they didn't hand over taxation in exchange for his private army's protection.
Huh.
You might recognize this as a protection racket. More than once, he unleashed his forces on towns who were pissed that they were already paying taxes to Rome, so they shouldn't also have to pay for this guy, who was in Roman exile and technically an outlaw. He stayed there until Cinna finally died. Afterwards, he ran and joined Sulla once again for his second civil war. In this war, Crassus proved himself to be a very talented commander, and it was integral to Sulla's eventual victory and ascension to dictator of Rome. So for the first, and I should point out, like, dictator was a title in Rome. That didn't just mean that they were a dictator. It means two things. Moving on. This is not, in fact, the Politics of Rome podcast, even though it's super interesting and weird to me. It's a lot like trying to understand what like American politics was a long time ago, because it's just a whole bunch of rich people trying to kill one another for power. So for the first time, Spartacus is going to have to square off with a skilled commander with a proven track record and experienced soldiers. Not only was Crassus's track record of military success, but it was certainly a track record of not fucking around. Furthermore, there is some evidence to suggest that after fleeing into exile and returning to Rome, Crassus had actually rebuilt his massive wealth through the slave trade. So he had some personal interest in ending this shit too. I know this has nothing to do with the series, but I feel like I should point this out because it smacks of modern times. Another way that Crassus rebuilt his wealth was by buying poor people's homes, fixing them up with slave labor, and then selling them at a huge markup.
Houses.
The dude gentrified Rome. He also had his own fire brigade, as formal fire departments weren't a thing yet. And then when they heard someone's building was on fire, or their home, or like apartment complex, which is also a thing, different name, but same thing, was on fire, he would order them to rush to the house and would then offer to buy it for them at a much lower price than it was worth. And if they refuse, they would just let it burn down and pay them nothing. And then he would flip it. Sometimes he would then fix up this partially burnt down house and offer to lease it back to the original owner at triple the rate that they had originally paid for it.
Before you had this wall right here. We took it down. Open concept. You see.
Open concept. Also, if you don't give me money, you're homeless. I guess what I'm getting at is Crassus is a fucking bastard.
This dude has been hustling.
Anyway, this dude is a fucking dick, and he is a main reason as why the Republic fell later on. He's a real asshole. Anyway, Crassus was elected praetor, mostly by default. He was a cold and calculating politician and knew what he had to do in order to further curry favor for himself. So rather than just offering to lead another legion against Spartacus, he decided he would recruit his own and pay for it out of pocket for their training and weapons. That's how rich this guy was. I'll buy my own army. Fuck you. And like I get like incredibly wealthy people who buy houses and cars and jet skis and whatever, but like I want to buy my own legion. That's a true flex.
Do you?
Eric Prince knows what I'm talking about. Anyway.
Oh, I just had the weirdest. He was. You know how there's that one show on TLC where they're like, "Move that bus." He had his, but he was like, "Move that chariot."
It's that show. It's like, "Move that bus," and they pull out of the way just a fucking Roman legion. Oh God! Oh no! So on top of this, he was given the 2 legions that had previously been defeated in battle, the last 2. Altogether, he found himself almost immediately in command of 50,000 Roman legionaries.
That's a lot.
Now, there's some contention as to what happens next when Crassus marches off after Spartacus. According to some sources, he fought a small part of Spartacus's forces, and some legions ran off away from battle. In Appian's account, he marched his army out of Rome and then immediately subjected the 2 consular legions to the practice of decimation. It was as punishment for their previous running from battle, as a kind of example to the whole thing. Now, we've talked about decimation before. For those unaware or didn't watch our first or second episode, I can't remember which, where we talked about Italy's greatest military hero, Luigi Cadorna, a patron saint of this podcast, after the CIA, I assume. Now, decimation is the practice of forcing soldiers to draw lots. And the man who drew the short straw, normally 1 out of 10, hence the name decimation, would be murdered via being beaten to death by the other 9 of that group.
It's not fun.
Yeah, that's how Crassus rolls out his change of command ceremony. Like that seems, and Appian points out this is to show his soldiers that he was more dangerous to them than Spartacus was. To the surprise of probably nobody, this worked really well, and Crassus's soldiers suddenly became flushed with motivation as Crassus pushed them to march harder and faster. So, I mean, that worked.
Could you imagine being in that legion? Anytime you got the straw, it was automatically just all of them were cut to be short. That'd be your luck.
Suck. And like it wouldn't even be like, all right, this would suck. Like you pull the straw in a short and like you're gonna get stabbed or like just like hacked in the neck or whatever, because like the people that are beating you to death, but like or that are going to be killing you. But you in this practice, you had to be literally beaten to death with bricks and stones and sometimes bare fists and feet. Like they wouldn't give you the easy way out. Like you're gonna die and it's gonna hurt the whole time. Anyway, I have a new hustle. All right. Everybody gets out of the military, junior leaders, sometimes officers or whatever, and they immediately sell themselves as like business consultants. So I'm going to start my own business consultant firm. And the only thing I'm going to do is recommend businesses make all of their CEOs pull straws, or like the board of directors, right? Because like the board of directors should actually just be made up of the workers who have a hand in the production and the value. But the actual like board of directors, like, all right, kids, this is what we're gonna do. I'm Joe. I'm business Baz here, and I'm gonna make you guys pull straws. I'm not gonna tell them why, right? They're gonna pull a straw and like, oh, Mr. Bezos, you pulled the short one. I have a whole warehouse crew out front, and they brought bats. I don't know if any of that could. And
they're not even good bats. It'd be like the wiffle ball bats.
They'd absolutely have to be wiffle ball bats
the whole time,
because letting people like. Anyway, this is my team building exercise. So I bet the next 9 people are way more motivated about doing the right thing. Like ExxonMobil, I hear that you dumped a lot of oil in the ocean. I have some straws.
Could you imagine if the next 9 people are like, "There's no way he has that many straws."
Do it again. I'll be back. It's like that meme. I'll fucking do it again. Why do people keep hiring his firm? So Crassus had a bit of a problem keeping up with Spartacus. Not because he was necessarily slower, but because Crassus was used to fighting actual soldiers and had like an idea of how actual soldiers would act. But Spartacus and his rebel army marched seemingly at random with no mission or destination. And like parts of it would break off and raid towns. So he'd be like, we have reports that this town or this village got taken over. Oh, fuck, they must be going this way. Nope, guess not. Shit. It was just a small group of them. And every once in a while, small groups of Spartacus's raiders would get caught and they would be murdered. Yeah. Never had a chance. No. When those situations, like you can't really guess what they're going to do next because they don't know what they're going to do next. And, and a piecemeal fashion, the two armies did run into each other. A few of the legions would be attacked by a detachment of rebels, but Crassus couldn't get Spartacus to commit his entire force. And in each of these battles ended in a Roman victory, losing thousands of people, or Spartacus lost thousands of people, and the legionnaires took like virtually no casualties. No numbers aren't really known, but they're like single digit.
What?
Yeah.
They're not even the good ones.
Some people might.
This guy died of
some people
being stepped on by too many dudes.
During battle, he tripped and rolled his ankle, and then an arrow fell into the back of his head. Now, some people might object to the idea that Spartacus is marching randomly, but as the only explanation for what happened next. And that is he marched directly into a peninsula, effectively trapping himself.
Meant to do that.
Like, this is got him right where I want him. All over the place. Like he marched into the peninsula and then just stayed there. Like maybe he didn't know it was a peninsula. He's like, oh fuck, there's ocean over here. Because it's not like he had a map.
Quick. How many vines do we have?
Most of these guys aren't from Rome. So like, and Crassus thought this is such a dumb idea that he kind of was like, this must be a trap of some kind. So he kind of hesitated on closing in. Like nobody would do something this dumb on purpose. But it quickly became apparent that, nope, he just didn't know what he was doing. So Crassus ordered his men to move in and trap the rebels, again laying siege. His next plan was something straight out of a Looney Tunes cartoon. he ordered his soldiers to begin digging a massive trench from one side of the peninsula to the other to make sure that the rebels couldn't escape.
Digging line?
Like this reminds me of like the Bugs Bunny skit where he's like sawing Florida off, but it's just Legionnaires digging with shovels and shit. Like, fuck, this sucks. We just had to march 80 fucking miles or whatever, and now we have to dig a trench across an entire peninsula. I'm willing to risk getting decimated.
That's gonna be the shittiest detail on this podcast I've heard.
Digging like this is like tens of miles. Yeah, it's got to be, and it has to be deep enough where people can't just like deep and like wide enough where people can't just like casually jump across it. So it's deep as fuck. And like historians have said, it still kind of remains there. Like there's like you can kind of point it out. Now Spartacus led small portions of his army out on harassing hit and run attacks on the soldiers as they dug. And like some of them were like gathering bundles of sticks together. So like Spartacus' men would gather bundles of sticks together, cover them in tar, and then light them on fire and chuck them into the ditch while people were digging, burning them alive. Yield napalm. At one occasion, they grabbed a soldier while he was digging, crucified him, and hung him up on a part of the line where all the Romans could see.
Oh, fuck.
Now, this had two purposes. To scare the Romans, who, like, obviously, like, hey, if we capture you, this is what happens. But also, it was something of a motive. Like, some people opine it was a motivation technique on Spartacus's part, warning his side, this is what would happen to you if the Romans win. Because the Romans, like, really like to crucify people. Like, if this happens to you, they'll kill you really, really badly, like this, like we're doing to this guy.
Yeah, well, Jesus Christ, you.
Yeah. Well, yes, but that hasn't happened yet. Despite weeks of work in completing this peninsula-wide trench, Spartacus and the rebels escaped by filling a small portion of the trench with dirt and trees and running into the night without them realizing what was happening before it was too late. Because, yeah, that's how you escape that. You can't possibly man this entire line.
That's fucking awesome.
After that, Spartacus led his men south towards Sicily. It is generally believed that he accepted that he was never going to escape Italy from the north. Rome had gotten its shit together, and another legendary military commander, Pompey the Great, had returned from Spain with another 50,000 soldiers that were now staring down at him from the north. This pissed Crassus off because he saw Pompey coming as like a way of like trying to steal the glory of his military victory after he had done all the hard work, which, to be clear, that's exactly what Pompey was doing. Yeah. Now, Spartacus reportedly openly wept after hearing about the news of Pompey's arrival, understanding that there's a very good chance he and his rebels were all fucked. So his plan changed from escaping into Gaul to escaping into Sicily, which is like escaping into a dead end because Sicily is an island. Everyone knew about the previous First and Second Servile Wars, and he thought if he led his forces into Sicily, he could spark another rebellion and, replenish the tens of thousands of people that have died so far. Spartacus made it to the coast, where he made contact with some Sicilian pirates, who he paid with what remained of his loot to ferry him and about 2,000 of his men to Messina to continue the war. I assume he didn't tell the people he was leaving behind that he was leaving them behind, because he has about 40,000-ish people. He's like, I can only afford 2,000.
He's like,
bye, y'all.
We'll be back. No, we're turning right back around, I swear.
We're not coming back. Now, the pirates agreed and told them, like, well, we don't have enough boats for 2,000 people, so we have to go back, get more boats, and then we'll come back in a couple days. So instead, they stole all the Spartacus' loot and fucked off and never came back. Yeah, pirate stuff. Just pirate things. Spartacus knew Sicily was now out of the question, and he also knew Pompey and other legions were on their way, and he's
not really
into
Sicilian pizza, from what I heard.
I could really kill for some Sicilian pizza. It makes me really hungry. I'm probably ordering pizza after we record now. Now, Spartacus knew he was fucked. He sent an emissary to Crassus, asking for peace in exchange for safe passage to the north and out of Italy, promising never to return to Rome. Crassus refused immediately because he knew he had them cornered and he was dealing with a whole bunch of slaves. It was around this point Spartacus began to lose what cohesion that he had within his ranks, as about 13,000 people of his broke off from the main army and tried to make a break for it. They were almost immediately cornered and slaughtered by Crassus's legions without much of a fight.
If I were to just leave on my own will, like just me by myself, I'd be fine.
Just to like by yourself, sneak off in the middle of the night. That's probably that probably happened to a lot of people. Like slowly, like Homer Simpson sinking off into the bush.
Like,
I mean, freed slaves were very common. Even though some slaves were branded, but you know, whatever. They think of an excuse on the run, or get the fuck out of Rome, maybe. Furthermore, the organized surprise attacks that he kind of had been using were all but over. Small elements broke off and attacked the Romans randomly, not with like real no plan. This wasn't like a probing attack. They were desperate to escape. I don't know if it's for funsies. I think it's like flailing wildly, attempting to save their own lives. Spartacus managed to limp with what remained of his army towards the Salarius River, one of the two, where he knew he had no choice but to turn around and throw the full weight of this remaining rebel army against Crassus, in the off chance any of them were ever going to leave Italy alive. Like, he's like, got to put up or shut up. I have to win this battle, and maybe we can make a break for it. But he knew he was going to have to fight someone, and I guess he picked Crassus. Crassus was closer. In order to motivate his men, Spartacus ordered that his horse be brought in front of him. And when it was, he sliced its throat, saying that if he'd won, he'd have a ton of horses to choose from. And if they lost, it wouldn't matter because he wouldn't need a horse anymore. It was one of those things that, like, I'm not going to run. Now I can't. Everybody has to stand with me. Like, I'm standing with you until the end. Which,
in my head, I'd be like, fuck, my feet really hurt. Why did I do that?
I would have traded you for that horse. Facing him, Crassus once again built 37 miles of defensive works consisting of walls and ditches. I mean, this is not uncommon. Building forts on the go is pretty common for Roman military tactics. Like small outposts, walls, trenches, things like that to slow down their enemies. Again, it hardly mattered because, you know, they again, these are all things that you do when you're fighting a cohesive, organized group of men. Spartacus was not any of those things. He led a group of men sneaking up over the walls of the defenders and began to silently attack the pickets, opening up a gap for the rest of his men to charge through. However, this didn't work because, you know, when you're being ambushed, you make noise. Some of the people on the wall were able to give warning to Crassus's main army, which, you know, like they should have done at Mount Vesuvius. So the Roman army had enough time to form up. So the 50,000 rebels slammed into about 40,000 Roman soldiers in full battle formation. The slaves slammed into the Roman shields and began to get slaughtered. The slaves fought as hard as they could, but simply could not overcome the murder machine of a properly led, properly trained, and properly armed army of legionnaires. During the battle, Spartacus saw Crassus watching the battle from a nearby hill. And he decided, fuck it, if I'm going to die, I'm taking that asshole with me. And he charged it single-handedly. He killed 2 centurions in the process, who were like junior commanders of around 80 men apiece, known as the centuria. Like, he kind of slaughtered some company commanders, which we can all get behind that. During his blood-blind rage to get to Crassus, he was stabbed through both legs and impaled with a spear, but kept on killing everyone around him. This finally ended when he was overpowered by sheer numbers and killed only a few feet away from Crassus, who by all accounts didn't even bother running away.
Sounds like a fucking movie.
Kind of was. I mean, again, this is all secondhand accounts. Crassus didn't say that's what happened, and Crassus was there. But in Crassus lives, that's what Plutarch said. So I'll take that. The rest of Spartacus's army didn't stand a chance without him and were brutally slaughtered, though several thousand saw the writing on the wall, tossed down their weapons, and surrendered, assuming going back to a lifetime of slavery is better than being hacked to death in this field. History notes that about 36,000 slaves were killed and only about 1,000 Romans.
Fuck.
Yeah. Another about 5,000 slaves escaped the battle entirely, but were caught by Pompey's army and killed. Unfortunately for the slaves who were captured during the battle, or after the battle rather, Crassus had no intention of returning them to the bonds of slavery. Crassus had around 6,000 prisoners march down the Appian Way in a single file line. Once there, they found a whole bunch of crosses. And from the road between Capua, where the rebellion began, and Rome, known as the Appian Way, he had them crucified, spaced apart so they'd line the entire highway, a distance of 132 miles. The slaves were left up on their crosses to rot in the sun for weeks or months, however long it took them to simply rot and fall off, as a warning to any slave that saw them what would happen to them should they ever think of pulling a Spartacus ever again. And it worked. There was never a fourth servile war.
There's like nothing good about that. Sad.
No. Also, the massive amount of military power that had been gathered by Pompey and Crassus would go on to bend Rome to its will. Neither side would disband their legions and instead camped outside of Rome, opposite of one another. They then both ran for consul, despite the fact that Pompey wasn't even eligible. Both men won the consulship, based mostly entirely on the implied military force that would be used against the city, or at each other if it didn't. Isn't it fun when republics forsake their own rules in order to appease threatening strongmen? Certainly nothing to learn from that. But this would eventually lead to the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. The end?
I mean,
that's the end.
Didn't see that coming, to be honest.
Yeah, like the crucifixion of the slaves down the Appian Way is like one of the more legendary things that's happened, because it's like so cartoonish in its brutality that you're like, no, this is like the story of Christians being fed to lions in the Colosseum. It didn't really happen. This shit fucking happened. They crucified 6,000 people over 132 miles so everybody could see.
That's fucking insane.
Imagine just like going about your business like, God, what is that stench? Oh,
yeah,
it's
going down the freeway.
The rotting, it's the Corpse Road. We've come full back circle to Corpse Road. Now, Nick, we do a little thing on this show called Questions from the Legion. It's been one whole episode because we like for people unaware, we wait until the end of a series. So we don't ruin the flow from one episode to another. Not that I'm good at flow. Sorry. I would like to think I am. You'd think I'd be good at it by now. You'd be wrong. Now, this one is a little bit different. Has to do with history research. It's simply how do you what do you consider a good primary source?
Yes.
This is a pretty basic question. And I'm glad somebody asked it, actually. Because a lot of people ask how I find sources. And I always say, oh, it's a primary source. And unless you know what the fuck that means, I didn't tell you anything. So a primary source is simply put a raw material of history. Original documents or eyewitness accounts created by people who witness an event happen. So like Appian Civil War, Plutarch, those are both considered primary sources of Roman history, depending on what they're writing about. My book, Hooligans of Kandahar, would be considered a primary source on the American war in Afghanistan. Zinke Boys would be a primary source on the Soviet-Afghan War, of which there is not many.
Forgot about that book.
One of the most grimmest books ever written. So that's why these definitions are pretty important. So, like, especially now when people say we live in the post-fact era, when you have to try to hunt down sources, if things are considered quality sources. Now, that doesn't mean a primary source is necessarily 100% correct. We ran into that today. But you can take that eyewitness account or original document and cross-check it with secondary and other primary sources and decide if they are a reliable source. There's a lot of primary sources that are bullshit. A good example of that would be, or secondary sources, I should say, that are bullshit. And you can use primary sources to prove them incorrect. A good way of doing that is, for instance, I wrote my graduation thesis on the Armenian genocide. All of that is based on primary sources, and I use those to debunk secondary Turkish sources that say a genocide did not happen. And they will cite their own primary sources for their argument. And that is how you find out if an argument is bullshit or not. And anyway, that is how I have been kind of doing the Donkey U episodes on PragerU. But they don't list their sources. So things like that make it harder. And you kind of have to deduce what the fuck they're talking about. So it doesn't always work that way. But that is primary sources. So if you are maybe you haven't gone to college or you're in high school and you haven't quite figured those out yet. I don't remember if they taught primary sources in high school or not. I'm old. Those are definitions that you need to get used to if you look forward to this kind of thing.
I use Joe's brain until it finally rots.
I got 6 to 12 months at best.
That's mine. My research.
Nick, thank you again, as always, for joining me on this crucifixion-filled story.
That's a good way to put it.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And until next time, use decimation. Later.